My name's Justin, and to begin, we'll do a quick round of introductions. But first off, I'd like to thank the people who are involved in helping get this set up. First to my teammates Alyssa, Marissa, and Sanju for their hard work that they put in over the last several weeks and months to do this project. And to Dr. Godow and Elizabeth, and Dr. Madama, if he was involved in helping us secure this room, tables, chairs, all that kind of thing. So to give a little background, throughout the course of this semester, as a class, we've been examining the position of the university within the global community itself. And using this framework, our group decided to tackle this by moderating different panels throughout the class and then culminating it to this final panel, where we've brought in people from outside of the university and within other universities to discuss these issues. To lay out what today's panel will look like so that everybody can kind of follow along, each topic today will have about 15 minutes to be discussed by all 8 panel members up here. It's designed to be a discussion among all 8 and not an interview, so anybody who feels like they have something to add to any conversation is more than welcome to. We will start with the debate between general and specialized education. We'll move on to the free tuition topic. From there, we'll move to admissions quotas, and finally, we'll wrap up with the idea of sanctuary campuses. Following these topics being discussed, we'll have a 15 to 20 minute question and answer period where anybody can ask questions to anybody up here. A few guidelines come along with that just so that we can kind of maximize our time and the knowledge that we can receive from our panelists that have joined us. We ask that only questions are asked and not arguments being made. Certainly you can frame a question around an argument, we have no issues with that, but we're looking to avoid dialogue between 2 people and rather have you ask a question and have a dialogue between 8. Secondly, in order to get to everybody that has questions, we're asking for 1 question at a time rather than multiples, and I will work to get around the room to everybody should there be more than 1 question if people have them. But for now, let's just work through 1, and I will work to get around to everybody else, okay? Lastly, try to refrain from raising your hand trying to ask a question during the panels. We'll definitely get to all the questions afterwards, and the questions at the end can cover all of the topics. It's not limited to anything. So we will definitely try to get to everything in that 20-minute period. Now let's get to the people who are on the panel today. From our class, the Reclaim Higher Education group, Marissa, Sanju, and Alyssa are all a part of this, including me. We're seniors and been working on this project for the last 2 semesters doing research and moderating panels throughout the semester with our fellow classmates. Next, we have Gabriela Flora, who is the program director for the American Friends Service Committee. It works through education, media work, and community organization to give immigrants rights that they deserve. Next, we have Ali Hermanuts, and I'm pretty sure I just screwed up your last name.
Hermanuts, close enough though.
See. Who's a member of the member and grassroots advocate for the Casa Mayan Collective. He works to provide advancement within education and entrepreneurial growth for future generations. Shauna McMahon, she is the assistant dean of the graduate school out on the Anschutz Medical Campus. She works with current students on their graduation plans as well as recruiting students for for future classes. Excuse me. Next, we have Miriam Tapia Salinas, who is the Executive Director for Diversity, Enrollment, and Community Partnership at the University of Denver. Her responsibilities include expanding diversity within the new freshman classes and working to ensure that everybody who wants an education can get it no matter their background. And last but not least, we have Nick Titus. Nick is a senior at Centaurus High School and CEO of Myonic. This company he and his fellow classmates founded in order to make and sell medical equipment that allows paralyzed individuals to have control of their muscles again. But enough of me, let's get to the important stuff. We'll start with Marissa and her panel topic of specialized versus generalized education.
Okay, so I just want to give a bit of a brief overview about what we talked about during our panel. And so we focused on the topic of specialized versus generalized education. And so for us, that meant generalized we took as kind of your typical liberal arts degree. You have your major and you take multiple interdisciplinary courses as well. And then specialized education, we talked rather than like vocational schools, but as if you could go to school and take, say, a chemistry major and you're gonna have only chemistry classes and be able to graduate with that. And so that not only kind of lessens the burden of cost, but makes it so students have less disinterest in their courses. And so obviously both of those have very different backgrounds. Generalized education, there's the debate that you're having a more well-rounded student, have more opportunities to see what you like and don't like. And so kind of just a little bit about what our panelists said. One of our panelists, Coach Shell, suggested an interdisciplinary approach to education helps students realize most issues we face later on in life are multifaceted and often require a variety of specialties to adequately address the issues. And so that kind of encompasses the idea that it's more than just one course that you're taking. And so what you face later on can be a lot more than that. And so from the other side, Will Card suggested this is obviously just a brief suggestion that they had, not their entire argument, but the rigid guidelines of efficiency that universities have adopted to move students through degree programs or well-rounding courses proves not to have an impact on students' critical thinking. They pass through this portion of their education waiting for certification for jobs and other positions, heavily ignoring the benefit that liberal arts education brings. And so a lot of what we discussed with this as well and kind of came to a consensus on is that the courses we take within UHL, for you guys that don't know the courses, are very multidisciplinary. So we take a English class, but it's based on, has more history involved in it. So you're not just learning to write something, you're applying the arts and history and all of these things at once. And so we kind of discussed the idea of those courses as well as maybe something that can be you're taking a chemistry class and your writing courses involve the sciences. And so something that would be more beneficial to keep students interested as well. And obviously that's still something that's costly to the university. That's not necessarily something that classes can just come to. And so from Nick and Shauna here, we have two very different approaches. Someone who works very highly in the higher education system and someone who's making his way as a senior, trying to not even necessarily needing the next level. And so what we asked from you guys both is just basically, what are your thoughts on the topic? And so what do you guys see in the system that works, or where do you think it could have improvement? So whichever one of you would like to.
I'd like to start.
Well, okay, so I'm going to start by saying I don't have a liberal arts education. I did my undergrad at the University of Manitoba in agro-ecology, and I would have poked my eyes out if I had had to take like a true liberal arts degree. And our credit system was very different, so I didn't get extra credit for my lab, so every course that had a lab was still 3 credits. So sometimes I spent 3 or 4 afternoons a week in 3-hour labs. That was still a 3 credit class. And I still had a 120 credit hour undergraduate. So you can imagine how many specialized courses I was able to get in there. Like everything I took was agriculture related. My English was technical communication, so it was all like business writing and useful things. And I mean, I had to take some gen ed, but I also had an IB background, so I was able to bring in some of that credit. And so in certain respects, now I kind of regret not taking something like anthropology or psychology or something, because now I think people are fascinating, but like then, no way. So I appreciated that the university system that I was in allowed me to make that decision, that I didn't have to get a more broad degree. I could get a very specific degree because I am in higher education. I knew I was going to get a doctorate, and I knew I was going to get a doctorate in a very specific field. So I went straight from my undergrad into a master's degree, into a PhD, into a postdoc, into teaching here, into working at Anschutz, and ta-da, now I'm the assistant dean of the graduate school. And I think that as we're looking in my job now, where I am seeing the impact of a more broad general education is I simply don't think that a lot of the students are coming to us prepared. They're not taking enough science. And sometimes I hear students getting advice like, oh, so your science courses are hard, don't take more than like 1 or 2 in a semester. And I'm like, pardon me, what? You're getting a science degree. You should be taking nothing but science by the time you're in your, it doesn't have to all be like OChem, but the vast majority of what you should be taking as seniors should be science. And so that's my personal bias. This is not the opinion of the graduate school, and since I'm not on admissions committees, I see students in my office, unfortunately, when they are struggling. And so this is just my interpretation of some of what is leading to them to struggle. There's also some bias towards, oh, you can't get involved in science research until you've had science classes, and the first couple years of a more liberal arts degree is all gen ed stuff, so you can't start actually being useful in a lab until like you're a junior or senior, which is way too late to get involved in science if you actually want to be in science. So I'm not a fan. Personally, I'm not a fan of the more liberal arts. I kind of like if you know what you want to do, go for it, focus on it. But as a general rule, I think I am probably pro higher ed. However, I am the parent of a 2-year-old, and if he decides somewhere in his future that some other path, like starting a business right out of high school, or some other form of education is the thing that works for him, I'm going to support that. My sister did not go to college. She went to massage therapy school and is now a very successful business owner, and she failed math. And science, actually. I was like, do you know that you got to do science to be a massage therapist? But it was the motivation. So like you were saying, if students are motivated to do what they want to do.
Absolutely.
Yippee. So maybe I'm not as like anti as maybe I was supposed to be, but.
Oh no, there's always response.
So I guess I can start off the same way. I also do not have a liberal arts degree. I don't have a degree in high school. But my experience with education, I guess, has been a little bit different. When I was younger and back in elementary school, I wasn't a great reader, but I had this really great teacher who helped with me and worked with me in all these different areas. And then through middle school and the beginning of high school, I was a really good student. That was my main focus. I played sports and I did other things, but working hard in my classes and being curious and learning all these new things, that was very interesting to me. So I got really good grades up until a certain point, and that point was when I started this science fair project that I had. And it was this class where the goal of the class was just to come up with some idea for a prototype and then build it, and then you write this big paper on it. And that was interesting to me because I never did that. For years I'd been learning all this stuff and I'd been gathering all these tools in my toolbox that I could apply towards things, but I hadn't really put them towards anything myself yet. I'd worked on projects for classes and all that stuff, but when I got into this engineering class and I got to do my own thing, I came up with this idea for an external spinal cord, some way to reconnect the brain with the muscles. And then I built it, and I didn't have PhDs who were working in the lab. It was in my high school engineering lab, and I had a budget of less than $100 to do what I was doing. But I just had this idea, and I kept pursuing it. And that was, I think that's an important part. I had limited resources, I guess, what I was doing. My teachers were high school teachers, so they weren't really experts in the field that I was working in. But when I came to a problem that I couldn't solve, I just kind of Googled it and found there must be some way to make muscles move, and I would Google that and find some solution. And that just kept building over months and months, and going into it, I had never written a line of code or done any electrical engineering type stuff, but I just learned online how to do all that stuff through Googling and Khan Academy and all that. And I had this working prototype, and I had the opportunity to sit down with my teacher's father, who had a brain tumor. And so he had difficulty opening up his hand. And the device was brain controlled at the time. This was about a year ago. And I was in the high school engineering lab, and I said open, and his hand opened, which he hadn't been able to do in years. And that was really a key moment for me, because I'd seen this idea that I had, the sketches in a notebook that I had created, and it was actually affecting someone's life. And then afterwards, so after the science fair, I only got 3rd place, and that's
What?
because
I was gonna say, did you win Intel last year?
No, I did not. I got
Jeez.
3rd place at the regional science fair. I think part of it was I presented it as an engineering project, much less than like a science fair project, and so.
But it is an engineering project.
Yeah, I got so I got 3rd place, and then that meant I didn't move on to state, so I didn't really have anything to do for the rest of the class. So I just decided that I was going to start a company, because I was watching the show Silicon Valley, and I figured, well, if that guy can start a company, then why can't I? So again, I just went online and I Googled, how do you start a company? And I found this website, and I applied to something called the Boomtown Accelerator in Boulder. I didn't really know what it was, but I just kind of got lucky. I had a good application, and they had a last-minute company drop out of their summer class, and then they called us up, and I pitched them our idea to them, and then we participated. In summer of 2016, we took 3 months in there doing these business courses and learning how to build a startup and take what was a science fair project to the next level, and for that to actually become a company. And that was a very different type of education for me. I mean, I spent my entire summer vacation, like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, working on this company, which kind of would sound like a drag to most high schoolers, but the cool part was, as I was spending hours every day learning these tools, and then at the same time I was using them, and I was actually applying those things directly to my company. Now, since we've gained more success, since then the device is now fully brain controlled. I just did a TED talk at CU a couple weeks ago. I went out to San Francisco for something called the Teal Summit, and met with a bunch of other young entrepreneurs. We've done a lot of cool stuff, but the biggest struggle in my life right now is high school. It's the hardest thing on the planet, which is frustrating for me, because I've always gotten good grades. I'm always like an A, B student, always doing good. And this semester and the past semester, just kicking my butt. And it's weird, because my teachers, they recognize what I'm doing and they think it's cool. But at the same time, I think they think it's much more of a science fair project. And it's hard for me to go into school and learn about Japanese history and spend an hour every day learning about that, when I know that's not really going to apply to anything that I'm doing. And so luckily I have a backup plan. I applied to college. I plan on deferring admission and taking a gap year. Myself and my other co-founders all plan to do that. And I just have to graduate high school for that backup plan to work. So I just need to pass one class. So that provides me a little bit of comfort. But it's been a weird experience. My teachers really, I don't know if it's resentment because I'm kind of doing something successful on my own, or if it's just a misunderstanding. But I've really struggled with trying to learn things. I had no trouble learning like Japanese history before. That would have been fun to me. But now that I've seen that there's this passion that I can pursue and actually make real things happen in the real world, everything else that I'm learning at school that doesn't apply just seems kind of useless. And so it's been hard for me to find motivation. That's really the big issue.
You won't come back to all of it, but somewhere down the line you may think, wow, that was actually worth taking. My regrets all came like way later. I didn't do art or whatever. So yeah, no, I hear. Actually, my science project became my dissertation. I did compete at the Intel Science Fair. I am where I am because of science fair. Yeah, I was like, why aren't you there? But then I was like, no, you got to go to college, get an engineering degree, because those engineers, there are some careers in which there's going to be no substitution for credentials of higher education. Engineering is definitely one of them. And I'm worried about your liability.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was like, did you have some sort of approval to be, you can't experiment on people without approval. Like, our country is, you need to go like live in a different country. And live in this one.
I run into a lot of people who say that. I mean, because that's the traditional thing, is you gotta go to engineering school to be an engineer. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. That's, for me, like I'm lucky enough that I go to this public high school, but we do have an engineering course, so I've learned CAD and all that stuff. But in the age that we live in, this internet age where everyone has hyper access to information online, I think you don't necessarily have to go and take all the college classes to do what you want to do. I mean, that's, when I look at this problem, I think like, man, like engineers at Ivy League schools or people working at Medtronic and stuff should be the ones solving this problem, but they're not. And I think people who, when you go through a college for engineering, for example, everyone learns a very similar way, and you learn to kind of think inside this box. And so the current solutions that are out there right now to solve paralysis are very, in my opinion, over-engineered. And because we have this inexperience, and because we're kind of just naively curious about what we're doing, I think we've been able to bring a new perspective in. Because there's so many free resources out there, we've been able to create a solution.
No, it's definitely, we're in an age where you can tread a line. I definitely wish that we lived in an age where you could have a lab in your garage. Because I would have a lab in my garage, like but if I put a thermocycler in my hobby room, my neighbors are going to freak out. So that's what I want to have at home, is the thermocycler and that kind of thing. Engineering, I think you can get away with things a little bit easier, but like, think about the innovation that has happened, right? Very few people who have led the massive innovations that have led to our society had college degrees, right? They didn't go and get in that little box. But sometimes the credential can get you the cred for what you already know. And sometimes you have to get that.
I guess that's one of the bigger downsides I've seen from not having a degree, is it's a little harder to get people to take me seriously. Because I mean, if you look at it from the outside, just on a logical level, it's a kid with a science fair project. But I think I'm able to make up for that pretty quickly once I show the evidence of just the fact that the technology works. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, young people working in garages are the ones who flip industries on their head and provide those technological revolutions. And the people, I guess, if there's people who aren't taking you seriously with what you're doing, then they're just going to be behind the curve.
Can I add to the discussion? So from a higher ed perspective, at a semi-liberal arts institution, kudos to you. Like your tenacity and your curiosity in and of itself is going to have a lot to do with why you're successful, regardless of whether you have a degree or not. However, the way in which we're thinking about education as a whole from higher ed standpoint is very linear, that it's the class and then the outcome. But that's not all that higher ed provides you, right? I mean, so much of it has to do with your social and cultural capital that you acquire while you're in this space, where the experts in the field and your potential colleagues of learners will also serve as a benefit and a resource to help continually evolve your work and evolve your thinking as you're going through the process. Your faculty and chairs of departments can then utilize their social resources to connect you to some of your ideas and further ways to really move it forward,
Yeah.
or to challenge it based on their own mistakes from their own previous work. And so the value of education is far beyond just that coursework that you could gain information on through a Google search. So that makes me really excited to hear that you're already planning on going on. I would say pair your engineering degree with a business degree. Because if you have this kind of thinking already, it's not going to stop with just this project.
Yeah.
Right? You have decades ahead of you, and so you're going to want to be able to be fully aware and efficient in understanding the processes by which you move your ideas forward broadly.
The chair of bioengineering would probably tell you not to get a business degree. He told me you can't teach entrepreneurship, even though we had an entrepreneurship track in bioengineering, and I was like, what's a track?
I would disagree. I would say get it after you get your technical degree, do an MBA. Don't waste your time in your undergrad in business.
Yeah.
Do an MBA following.
I think there's definitely some validity to that, and it makes it does make a lot of sense. I think one problem, I guess, that presents me as someone, I don't have a lot of money. I don't have any money saved for college, and college is crazy expensive. There are places where it's less expensive, but no matter what, it costs a lot. And
Someone would be smart to give you a full scholarship and take your patent. Have you
yeah,
patented this thing yet?
we have a provisional.
I was going to say, because
yeah.
tech transfer within the university can be,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of education keeps going up. The value is very high, but the value kind of stays the same. The degree that you get is continually worth the same amount, but for people, I guess, in my position, it looks like it costs a lot, and by just kind of putting myself out there into the startup world and into the biotech atmosphere that exists in Boulder, Colorado, this is a great place for it. I've been able to build a pretty valuable network for myself. A good thing about being a young kid is everyone wants to give you advice, because everybody has more experience than you do. Most of the mentors I meet have more experience in their field than years I've been alive. And so I get a lot of advice, which is a good thing. I mean, you have to take a lot of it with a grain of salt, of course, but I think without college yet, I've been able to build a good network and a valuable network for myself. And I just kind of fear, like, man, if I go off to college, I found something that I love and I want to pursue. And if I go off to college, that might just die. And I don't want that to happen. I think for me, it was like while I was still in high school. For a lot of people, it's while you're in college, it's a really good time to just figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life. But I would say once you figure it out, there's no point in waiting. You just got to start working on it. If you find something that you're passionate about and that will eventually allow you to make money, then you should don't wait. Like for me, going off to college for 6 years right now before I can keep doing this, if it was 4 or 6, it's still a scary thing to me. And luckily, being very young, it's the lowest risk time in your life. It's still cool for me to live with my parents, and I'm not supporting a family. So if it doesn't make money for a couple years, I'm going to be okay. I'm working a job on the side. The younger you are, the better time it is to take risks.
So this is a good point to transition, I think, into the issue of free higher education. So giving people like Nick the chance to be able to attend university if they so choose. So in a previous panel, our class focused on the pragmatics of free tuition. Our panel voiced concerns on whether it can be considered free rather than the ethics on if it should be free. And we concluded that there would have to be systematic changes to make this happen, but it isn't impossible. And given this background, we would like our panel expert, Ali Irmanowitz, to focus on the ethical concerns that would need to be addressed on this issue. So Ali, why do you think that higher education should be a right for all if they choose to pursue that?
Okay, so I have a lot to say on this, so if anyone needs to reel me back in, that's all right. But I have a background in political theory, so that's a lot of what I'm interested in assessing as far as it goes with current regimes or with sociological phenomena. So in this case, I'm going to kind of go with kind of like a moral approach to it, but also why is there this hegemonic, that is like this opinion shaping model that we all ascribe to, that higher education can't be free, it's logistically not possible, or we should live in a meritocracy where it should only be accessible to people who have really bright ideas, you know, like someone on this panel. Of Human Rights, which was drafted coincidentally at the end of World War II in 1948 after the most effective 20th century militant authoritarianism kind of wrecked the world, which maybe we're encroaching again in the 21st century. It says that everybody should be afforded elementary and secondary and technical education, free, full, compulsory. It's kind of an antiquated document, and again, maybe we need to redraft a new version in the era of this proto-fascist kind of regime change we're going through. But maybe, you know, this basis, again, being on merit is something that's included in the discussion with the Declaration of Human Rights, which is something that I'd like to problematize. This is a basis of liberal democracy, which is, for definition's sake, kind of something like a presidential system that the US experiences, where we have liberal thinkers. Depending on who you're reading, there can be a lot of different concepts of what liberalism is. But having a robustly engaged civic society where everyone has these universal rights like suffrage, right to associations, things like that. This liberalism is now part of this global project that especially since the fall of the Soviet bloc in 1991, the US has been leading along with other superpowers like kind of the remnants of the Reagan and Thatcher administrations, like between the US and Britain. So we have this idea that there's this liberal, everyone has these same rights, we're all in this free, loving society, when in reality, liberalism has, if you go from a radical critique, not radical like, oh, I'm on the far left or far right, radical as an approach to the roots of a problem, liberalism is a really horribly racist, sexist, xenophobic kind of practice that was adopted from, I mean, if you look at a Lockean standpoint, I mean, you can, you know, again, date this back to antiquated thought and political philosophy from, you know, American Revolutionary era thinkers. But a lot of this was based on keeping really strict gender, class, and race lines deepened in, especially America. You have to remember that the US Constitution was drafted with an inclusion of very little suffrage or human rights for a lot of people on this panel or in this room. So I think, you know, this is a mechanism, tuition, to keep people in class, gender, and racial divide insofar as it's accessible to everybody if you have the capital to access it. It perpetuates cycles of poverty, but you can get out of that if you have the capital and you have the accessibility to find full and fair employment afterwards. You know, MSU Denver is going to be a Hispanic serving institution insofar as it increases the tyranny of rank that everybody's trying to climb this ladder up towards. So really, I mean, it's a problem in our civil society that I think we need to address holistically, not just in higher education. I mean, this is problematized in everything that we go through, election cycles. You know, we have ideologues controlling not just higher education and other institutions that are state sanctioned, but also ones that are supposed to be allowing for free thought and kind of inclusion and kind of like what otherwise at a different time might have been revolutionary practice. Now they're kind of reproducing the same conditions that, you know, the oligarchs and the autocrats want us to exist in. And higher education, unfortunately, has become the place where you have oligarchs greasing these autocrats, you know, like look at our bookstores, look at our food court on campus. I mean, it's no surprise that the corporatization of our entire higher education model is more fundamental to the school existing than anybody pumping out good degrees. No disrespect to the dean down there. I don't think this is not an extension.
I wish I had any influence over the sorts of.
Yeah, and I don't mean to problematize like what individuals are doing, because I think, you know, like, again, the tyranny of administration as well isn't the administrators individually, you know, it's the praxis, it's the entire system that's working against people who otherwise have pretty altruistic views on wanting to, you know, obviously you're really passionate about education. I think a lot of educators and people in administration are, but, you know, we're being influenced so heavily by this kind of liberal doctrine of individualism, of increasing business enterprise through a pretty, you know, invaluable, now embedded kind of global project to teach our youth, but to indebt them at the same time, so as we can keep social order nice and neat.
How would there not being tuition, how would higher education being free, how would that shift the things that you're talking about?
Well, I think that's a later question, actually. I mean, I guess we can jump into that. Well, I think it's the question kind of on that I was prompted with was core values of the institution, which on the surface seem, you know, very lofty and altruistic, and there aren't a lot of things that are problematic about the core values. They're not like, we can't wait to get this new banking system in, we're gonna really work our best to indebt all the students. But I think when there's not a monetary incentive for corporate entities to monopolize a system like this, I think you would start to see, I mean, inherently there's always going to be some corruption, and there's always going to be people who are, you know, trying to work the system best they can. But I think it's going to really devalue a lot of things that higher ed really values right now, like the tyranny of the ranking, the rise of the administrators, the tight-knit bureaucracy that keeps growing and growing and growing in all higher education. And I think from like the pragmatic viewpoint, like we were talking about, reallocating resources that are otherwise used for kind of allowing the American empire to grow internationally through globalization, which we understand as being the military-industrial complex, or domestically as the prison-industrial complex. We spend something like $6 million every 36 hours on the prison-industrial complex. Alex Landau just told me that 2 nights ago, someone I would believe. So, you know, reallocating resources like that, I think, is obviously the pragmatic way to address it, but also addressing the culture, that it shouldn't be lucrative, it shouldn't be competitive to the point that it's like a business enterprise for people to be participating in the administrative aspects, and I just mean administrative. I don't think professors, and I often don't think deans are participatory in trying to increase the zeal of the school insofar as it's, I mean, on these ranks that kind of national newspapers and polls try to create to influence where students will attend. I mean, obviously in academic circles, they're trying, of course, everyone wants their research to look really good. So I think that's, again, addressing that kind of liberal viewpoint of merit, individualism, and kind of redressing those, so it's, you know, it's a mutualism that we're here we used to all come here because we were mutually benefiting one another and our communities and the global world, rather than coming here so we can have rank and status like what we see in people trying to garner in a really grand capitalist society.
Do you see any potential risks that could happen if we made higher education free for everyone?
The only risk I really see is not trying to pursue this, because we're having, again, a reproduction of intergenerational trauma by not allowing people into this arena. Whether or not we're doing it on paper, there are certain limitations that certain identity communities and people who have gone through total discrimination through hundreds of years now don't have the same accessibility to resources like higher education. Not only because capital, but also because of things that generations before they had no influence on, that now affect their communities really broadly. I think maybe something that you might see if we don't pursue this is a rise of younger generations willing to create really serious social upheaval. And I was just reading The Independent, which is a UK kind of centrist paper, but they're a little more left compared to American politics. And they said that they pulled 20,000 18 to 34-year-olds, and the majority of them said they would join a large-scale uprising against the generation in power if it were to happen in the next day or month. You know, like, people are really already on the cusp of this, and I think when we're antagonizing everybody by creating this indebtedness, it allows for social reform and really a lot of like direct action understandings, like the Occupy movements that we've seen, the Arab Spring. I mean, we've seen international movements that are shaking the power and can really create serious social distress that wouldn't necessarily be, it wouldn't be necessary if we didn't have social phenomena like this, but it's going to become necessary, and I think that's the threat of not pursuing it. Of pursuing it, I can't really come up with anything critical of, I don't know if anybody else on the panel.
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting where you should, so American education is obnoxiously expensive, right? I'm Canadian and.
Me too.
Oh, are you nice?
Going
Yeah.
to York in the fall, actually.
Yeah, I was gonna say, go home.
Yeah, get out of here. What are you doing here?
I need to go take my son and live up there for a while. And I mean, it's gotten more expensive, but it's still nothing like this. But a lot of those European countries do also have relatively accessible higher education, and yet they are still, experiencing a lot of these social traumas that we are here. They look a little different, but do they access it as, do more people in places where higher education is more affordable go and get higher education than they do here, or do Americans just get a bucket load of debt?
I actually have no idea. I haven't looked at those statistics. That's a good question. I don't know, Melissa.
It sort of, it lends to the persuasion of why we should, if not make it free, make it not what it is now.
Right.
And not the debt. I didn't take any debt, and I don't love that American students have to take on that kind of debt.
Right.
I think I would just add that some of what you're talking about, and I don't necessarily disagree. I think you're looking at things from a very theoretical framework, and there's so much truth in questioning the higher ed system as a whole. I mean, the higher ed system as a whole was created as a mechanism to separate the classes and to maintain power, supremacy, and authority over others, to be able to continue to reign, right? It was done, and mechanisms within higher education to even allow for space and access to higher ed, such as the ACT came from the military to really privilege white males to maintain power, privilege, and control within the system, and to underprivilege or dismantle the opportunities for others to kind of make their way through the ranks of social class. So yes, that's flawed, right? Like, it's inherently flawed, and yet it is the system that we live and reside in. And it's not to say that it shouldn't be examined, potentially dismantled, deconstructed, and reconstructed. I would certainly be a proponent for such. But for the time being, all of your lives really matter, right? And what you do for the next 10 to 20 years additionally matters. And there is no other more transformative action than gaining a higher education as a mechanism of moving up the social ladder. And it's still true even at this time when the prices have skyrocketed and when financial aid has flip-flopped from those that really have been neediest, which it was built out in the 60s and 70s, to now being utilized as a recruitment tool for the highest achieving and richest students who have high test scores, who can also then still access higher ed funding to be able to support their entry into the education system. So, yeah.
So one of the things you said was it's definitely worth it. Like, it's becoming more and more costly, but it's definitely worth it. When does it become not worth it? What is that point?
I think there is a point. I think it's a very personal point.
Yeah.
I think that point exists if you're going to become an educator and your debt level exceeds your first year of earning, you're not making a wise decision, right? If
Yeah.
you're going to go into the medical
great
profession.
rule of thumb. That's a really great rule of
No,
thumb.
it is my rule of thumb. In
Yeah,
fact,
no.
I
Right, we
advise many
should- we
folks
should
not to
put
take
that
out that kind of
card.
debt. It's just not worth it for
People.
you.
Okay.
But I think the other thing is that, I mean, whereas you've got lawyers who in years past, right now, the average debt for lawyers is about $129,000 a year.
Yeah.
Okay? If they're gonna earn above and beyond that, depending on the kind of law they practice, then potentially it's worth that risk, right? If they're going into immigration law around that, potentially, right? Someone's like, I thought of that, and I'm not gonna go that way. And so did I, for that
Or
reason.
environmental law.
Or environmental law, those that don't pay it out and that your risk is higher than your potential reward, not a good idea.
Yeah.
So there's no simplistic one answer fits all.
Yeah, I think one thing, I guess that makes it hard is, I mean, it's like supply and demand.
Sure.
The price keeps going up because people are always willing to pay that because it's a college degree. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to say like, college is worth this much for me and I'm not going to pay more than that because people are willing to take out debt and stuff. So I guess that's just, I feel like if more people kind of put their foot down at like, this is what if people stop paying those high amounts, then they're going to have to stop charging it and it's going to have to be competitive at a certain point.
And things like Khan Academy and right online universal opportunities are really going to call that to question as well. But you're right. I mean, higher ed has absolutely and perhaps always was an entrepreneurial effort, right? This is a business.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, definitely. Which is weird because I mean that's not I think what it should be for because
I totally agree.
the point of it is like society has a vested interest in making our kids smarter because then they'll come up with better stuff for us to buy when we get older. And that's a very colloquial way of saying that. But if you, yeah, like, I mean, medicine's gonna get better, technology's gonna get cooler, we're gonna have better stuff if the younger people are smarter, and also the economy's gonna be in a better position. And so really, society has a vested interest in making that happen, and that's something that the government would be interested in having happen. Like, we need to make that, I mean, that's why we have high school. That's why I can go to high school for free. For some reason, I think because for so long, I mean, there's private schools and all that for high school, but because the public sector really dominates that area, while the private sector has dominated more of the college landscape, it's kind of become the norm for prices to go up and for it to be more an entrepreneurial pursuit rather than just to enrich society. And it's hard to fight against the habit, I guess, of that.
So with that, I guess I have a question for you. And you earlier said, right, like that level of the worth of getting a degree
Yeah.
is going to be the same no matter what.
Yeah.
And it's just the price that's going up. So on the flip side, if tuition were to be free and
Yeah.
it was accessible to all very easily, do you think that worth goes down? Of having a different
If more,
people come
yeah,
up with a
because
different
if everyone
solution?
has it, if everyone has a college degree, just like a high school degree, like if everyone's able to get it just as easily. I mean, you're still, that's the one deterrent is you're still gonna have to put in 4 years of work. There's not gonna be the deterrent of the high prices, but you're still gonna have to put in those work. I think there's a lot of people who are going to be willing to put in that work, especially because a lot of people, I mean, when you're 18 years old, you don't know what you want to do with your life. And so I think to keep learning is a good way to kind of facilitate you finding some new thing you can do with your life. So I think it's definitely possible. If everyone had a degree, I mean, if you just look at it from a point of then the job market is going to be flooded with a lot of other people who look just like you in that on an application, and it would make going to college time, I guess, less elite, and it would bring down the value. But that's okay if it doesn't cost anything.
Or if the fundamental value of intellect,
Yeah.
right, is actually valued.
Yeah.
And if it's not just the credentialing of it all, which I think is what your initial argument is in general. We see this on our own campus, or this campus, right? I think of this as my own campus because I was an undergrad here at MSU Denver, and I worked for Metro State for about 10 years before I moved into higher ed at DU. And our community college systems house tremendous talent. Just because someone chooses a community college does not make them less capable or less, right, intellectual. And yet, because, to your point, it has a stigma that it's not elite, it diminishes its value.
Definitely.
Now, that doesn't mean someone there isn't creating, you know, the same type of mechanism that you are, you know, but it wouldn't be credentialed in the same way.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing about it. Like, because I talked to my high school friends about that. It's so much smarter to go to a community college and just get prerequisites out of the way if you can, because it's way cheaper. And really, I mean, if you look at the difference from like going to an Ivy League school versus just like a middle of the road school, you're gonna get a good education at both places. But it's a lot about the name. Having Front Range versus having some other more prestigious name on the application, it closes doors for you. And that's the crazy thing, is it's all just about a name, and it's much less based on the actual value of the education you're getting.
And I would say both, because sadly community colleges are the least funded of all of our systems in the state of Colorado and in almost every state. And so is Metro State, being like our most diverse four-year university here in the state. And that, again, is an example of the priority given, right, in comparison to others. So while it might be thought of lower, it's also being underfunded and under-resourced, so not producing the same quality of education that folks are actually capable of receiving elsewhere because they're just better funded.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we're going to kind of move into a different topic area. The question was that panelists discussed was, do racial and gender admittance quotas in higher education make learning more or less accessible to all? And I think something with classes such as our class is we kind of discussed all the different points, and the way that the panel was formatted was we had an even split, more or less, of pro and con for affirmative action. It's what it boiled down to. And I think it was a good thing because it did voice some of the voices that might be unheard in a very liberal college setting often. So in general, what happened was one side decided that the most important characteristic are these special characteristics, and that students need to be evaluated for what they've accomplished, not just the fact that, and this was the premise of it, was their race or the stigma. And we focused on race rather than gender, just the way the overall panel went, but the other side decided that having a quota system in place is the way that we can make up for these 200 years of oppression. And it's the way to address the fact that there are some groups of people that are underrepresented or represented and don't get the same financial, benefits that other places do get. And so our question for you is, what is your stance on affirmative action? And if affirmative action could not be put in place, what's an alternative to that?
So we all come with our own understanding and bias, right? So I'm going to full on and say that I am a first generation college graduate, first generation United States citizen. My parents come from Mexico and Brazil and Bolivia, and I say all three because there's the mixture, so that's my heritage. And so having those experiences, grew up in a family that very much believed in the American dream. And the American dream was work hard, achieve academically, you will achieve in life, no matter what your humble beginnings might come from. Affirmative action was born out of Kennedy's executive order that recognized this is not a preference system. This is a system that is in response to the undeniable and continuing to be undeniable, disproportionately negative impact that race, skin tone, and gender, color, national creed have on one's societal experience in multitude of arenas. That includes the education system, that includes the hiring system. We could carry that over into the healthcare system. We could carry that over into renting a property. We can carry that into multiple systems, and it continues to be true. The Obama administration served as a convenient mechanism for many folks to believe that we were post-racial in society. And I don't know that there is anyone that has been through the last 100 days or last year that could continue to say that, given all that we've experienced in society and seen, that has always been there, based on the foundation of how the U.S. has been built and the ways in which social class and social order has been maintained and the status quo has been maintained. So the affirmative action, I want to first call to question just the terminology around the topic. When I received the flyer, and I'm very happy, thank you for inviting me to be here. When I received the flyer, I was hugely disappointed that for whatever reason, the educational panel is associating affirmative action with quota, because the courts already have determined that affirmative action is not a quota system, it's illegal, and it's been proven for decades, not just 5-10 years with the last court cases. It's Gratz, Grutter, right, Fisher, it's University of Michigan, University of Texas, University of California. It has been disproven that this is not a quota system, and yet we're here talking progressively about education and referring to affirmative action as a quota. So let's just get that off the table. This is not a quota system. Affirmative action continues to address disproportionate challenges that folks face. And if you take a look at the education system as a whole, we're really trying to put a Band-Aid at the end of the lack of equity through the entire pipeline, even pre-birth, right? That if you look at our former lieutenant governor in the state of Colorado, they did such research that demonstrated from healthcare capacity and access through pre-K work, through the quality and or lack of educators, through the funding or underfunding of communities, through the safety of communities or not of individuals, through the racial differences that exist in income inequality, that people on multiple unconscious levels, because we're impacted by societal forces, are hugely disproportionately making their way into college. So such intentional pipeline programs that exist for creation of college access are essential and a simple little Band-Aid onto a system that has already really negatively impacted entire communities, and that they're being placed on some simplistic things. So I would say, clearly I am for affirmative action, but it's not the only thing I'm for. I'm for educational equity. I'm for societal equity, and that's different than equality. And I want to be really clear about equity and equality. Equality is we treat everyone the same, and everyone receives the same benefits, but the underlying assumption to that is that we all started from the same place, and that's simply not true. And because that's not true, educational equity then means to achieve equality, you have to address educational equity, which means you put the most funding and resources and access and opportunity to the spaces that most require it. And in order to do so, then you eventually achieve equality. If I could wave a magic wand and work myself out of this role to have to achieve educational inequity, I would, in a heartbeat. I want a fair race. Let's all go outside and run and see who's the fastest. If we're truly at the beginning stage of fairness and equity, or equality, that would be fantastic. That would be my dream. Sadly, I don't see that happening anytime soon. And I think that things continue to happen. Charter schools, the underfunding of public education to focus on privatization. We're in really dangerous territory right now. If you look at, if we could do anything big scale, I would even suggest, look at our funding across the state. Why should certain neighborhoods get more money for public school systems just because those families pay more in taxes? If we cared about all of our children and all of our society, that would be equal. And then suddenly all of us would really care about public education again, because our own kids might be impacted by that. But right now, folks are really able to care only about theirs and not about everyone else. And whether we believe it or not, like government is about society. It's not about an individual. I believe in governing for societal growth and health, not for an individual.
So,
I wish I paid more taxes.
I'm sorry?
I wish I paid more taxes. We live in a condo and I pay $350 a year in residential taxes. And my son will go to a really good public school. Like, I'm not paying enough. There's not enough for me going into that pool.
And you know why? Because we live in the second least funded state in the country for funding for higher ed. And we have the largest racial gap in terms of achievement. And this is not about race, this is about opportunity. We call it an opportunity gap for those in the know, right? It's an opportunity gap because it's just a simple matter of underfunding. You know, you can't get personal attention, you can't address the multiple needs of communities if there isn't enough time and space to do so.
I think what you said, like you want to pay more taxes because you're not putting in enough, very admirable that you feel that way. I think what most people, if you ask them like, hey, we want you to pay more taxes, they're gonna say no. So I think, but the good thing is that I don't think we necessarily have to do that. There's so much money out there that is going towards, that's being allocated towards other things besides education. And so the solution might not even be like raising taxes. A lot of people don't like that. But just redirecting the funds that the government already has is, I think, one big thing.
I also say kill the military, and most people say no. So.
Or at least greatly reduced, so they continue. I mean, our military continues to be such a huge portion of our overall budget, and yet there is nothing to prove that we are behind. We continue to lead the world in all things militaristic, and how we're even beginning to have a conversation about more funding there is astounding. But you can always tell the values of a person, an organization, or a country based on where they spend their money.
Yeah, certainly.
Or where they don't.
Yeah.
And I would just say that actually today in Congress, the budget is being discussed and they're voting on it. And so actually this is a time to call and say, we have an action alert. I work on immigrant rights. We already spend more on immigration enforcement than any other enforcement in the country, in addition to military spending. We're asking folks to call your senators, call Senator Bennett, call Senator Gardner, and tell them to vote no on more budgets for detention and deportation and border militarization in the military, and to instead invest in education. I think that is, and healthcare. I mean, there's so many things, all of that. But again, this is the time right now for us to engage and tell.
And can I also say, I mean, this is I can understand. I have a very real visceral experience in education and in like the enrollment management side of how we get to craft our class in higher ed and how that could potentially be interpreted by individuals who may not be like the desired community, right? Like I am often, it hurts my heart a little bit to hear a comment like, we've reached the point where we have kind of filled our space for arts, humanities, and social sciences, and perhaps we don't need another out-of-state white female in that program. And the first time I heard that, and I've been in higher ed for about 20 years, I thought it was a little crazy for me because I believe in equity so much that it's the last thing you want to hear. Like inequality for me matters to me as much as it does for you, right? So there's something that's odd about that. And yet we privilege athletes. We privilege legacies. Right now, perhaps the most privileged group in all of society is the rich, because higher ed at the elite levels is need aware. And need aware means that we often will have your financial data in front of us when making decisions. And so when we think affirmative action is in play and is really heavy, know that at the middle and elite levels, a need blind policy is rare unless you've got the most well-endowed university. but need awareness is widely practiced.
I desperately want to implement some degree of blindness in our review at the graduate level. It's been shown to be effective in hiring. It's been shown to be effective in admissions, and our faculty are all like, "Oh, you can't do that because the letters of rec are going to have to be by name." And I was like, "Sure, but that's so far down the line. You have formed your opinion of that person the moment you read their name. So how about you just see their personal statement without any name on it?" And just some of these practices, because it's such a long pipeline. Like, I think as a person in higher ed, where we spend a lot of time thinking about the diversity of the student population in our graduate schools, and then the diversity of our faculty, and there's nobody who looks like the students that we want to get, so we can't get the students, and you're like, oh God. So like the pipeline goes back to, like you said, like pre-birth.
It really does.
It literally goes back to pre-birth, so it's health and access, and then it has to be deliberate. There was a coalition of fairly high-ranked universities that found if they were just deliberate in their hiring of faculty from various categories, they ended up, you have to actually go and approach people individually at the faculty level. Obviously that doesn't work with students, and yet we do it. As recruiters, we go to places where we know we're going to find more students that we can check a box on, and it's just
So I'm one that believes that race is a social construct, right? I really firmly do. I think biologically it's proven. But it's it's got strong societal implications. And I'm also one that's very, very proud of my cultural background. And to be denied that as part of what I bring, it's much, much more than checking a box. I bring public education spectrum. I bring an immigrant mindset. I bring a global perspective.
Yeah.
I bring multiculturalism. I bring one or two more languages, and that should be seen. And if someone else has difficulty with their own implicit bias, I think that should be addressed first before my identity be erased.
Yeah, the global perspective thing, I think, is definitely very important, because I'm in a program called IB at my high school, which the whole idea of it is getting a global perspective. And I go to a school, I believe it's like 40% Hispanic, and I'm in this IB program of 70 kids, and it's all white kids. It's all middle-class white kids, which is like the most hypocritical thing to me, because it's a bunch of white kids talking about, like, how do we learn more about the rest of the world and get a global perspective. And it's really weird.
Walk across the
Yeah,
hallway.
and I mean, yeah, exactly. And it leads to like weird conversations, and not like everyone has the same voice on everything. Everyone's coming from the same perspective. And yeah, I mean, like, kind of tying it back to the student side of things, like, raise your hand if you're racist. Exactly. Like, no one.
Everybody is.
Yes.
Honestly, all hands should go up.
I think one thing is, like, no one's gonna say, with what you were talking about, like the societal implications of like how racism affects everything. I think that's definitely true. I think most, certainly in college, I've never gone to college, but from what I see on TV, in college institutions and all that stuff, like, most people don't think of themselves as racist, and most people like don't want to. I would say there's probably small ways everyone's racist and they judge people in different ways, but they're not racist in the way where it's that the policy is and that the societal structures are impacting people. And I think that's something that leads to not getting anything done, because everyone says, like, I'm not the problem, because I accept that other people are other things, and I'm my thing, and we're all our things, and it's good. But so I think everyone thinks they're not the problem, and the people who are just blatantly racist, I mean, most of the time, people can identify those people as idiots, and their voice isn't really taken into account, and it doesn't really matter. But what is the bigger impact? It's more dramatic.
Someone needs to say that.
bigger problem is certainly like what's written into legislation that keeps people from having those equal opportunities. Luckily, I mean, people get older and they retire, and the people who put those laws into place are being replaced by newer, younger people who hopefully have a better global perspective and a better cultural understanding. And so promoting that, promoting the people who need to be represented, the people who the policy affects them to have that change, I think is very important.
I wanted to, is it okay if I can respond? So I have 3 sons, and all 3 of my sons are really bright. 2 of them are highly gifted and talented. And in 1st grade, of my elder son, he tested in the top 1%. And we never received word about his entering highly gifted and talented, right? I just was waiting as the parent, like, what's going on here? And nothing. So finally I called the school and spoke with the HGT administrator, and she said, oh, no, he's not on the list. And I remember going into the classroom previously and seeing precisely what you suggested. Like, it was very clearly not the most diverse classroom. So I asked, why did my son not get in this program? And I researched it further, and don't you know, they just bypassed him.
Wow.
And this teacher, but it wasn't, I don't believe it to have been a malicious act.
Yeah.
That all of us are impacted by implicit and subconscious bias that you literally have to address yourself. No one can do it for you. You have to just honestly say these words with me. I am a racist. I mean it right now. Say it. I am a racist.
I am a sexist.
And absolutely. No, you're totally right. And so it's like this very intentional deconstruction of those things by questioning all that you have just received, right? Without even realizing the millions of stimuli that are constantly coming at you. I would be a racist against Latinos too if I wasn't Latino. If I looked at TV, all I see is gangs, I see maids, I see, right? Like I would see low income, I would see uneducated, I would see overly sexualized, and then I would misrepresent myself. If that's all I knew. And so like you really have to dismantle those things to go, okay, I need to be open to looking further and even looking at myself, right? In what ways do each of us have privilege to really begin to address those things? I mean, I had underprivileged, but I also had privilege. My family ended up earning good money, and I was able to be a full pay student. We started out the poorest of the poor, and we ended up just fine. And am now great. So, I mean, there are privileges that exist in multiple ways. My husband would say I have pretty girl privilege, which I'll take that one. But there is something to be said about being physically attractive to anyone else. And I'm talking about me in the 20s. In my 20s, I was cute. Okay? But there is something to be said about that, right? Or being confident, or being an extrovert, right? There are privileges that didn't mean I'm better than you. I might just have that one little thing that person was looking for. So I'm sorry I took that off. But we are all racist, and we are all of the isms that you have just said, and we need to really, in deep awareness, dismantle that.
I think going along with that too, you see humans in general are very categorical, and so it's something you have to consciously think of not to do. You walk into a room and you see 10 people, and you see, okay, these people go here, these ones go here, and I'll talk to this one person. And it's something that you do. We talked about this in a communications and diversity class that I took. And it's just something that you do that's you don't realize you do it. It's something like crossing your arms a certain way that it happens every day, and you just do it. And it's like you said, something that you consciously need to think of.
And it starts frighteningly early.
It does.
By like 6 months, babies can tell the difference between genders. Different races.
And then we were talking earlier about our own children, and we happen to have our children in the same elementary school. Elizabeth and I, and they come home after preschool being racialized, right? And suddenly wondering, well, why am I not this, or am I this, or I don't want to be Mexican, whereas prior to that, they went to a dual language Montessori, visited Mexico, loved everything about themselves and their culture. And in a heartbeat, it can be misrepresented and misinterpreted. And then we as parents have to battle that. And the same is true, and we didn't get to this point, but I went to that same elementary school as a student. My mother lives across the street, I grew up there. And I feel like a visitor in my own community because it's so gentrified. And even in interacting with other parents, and sadly this is true, they very much segment off. And there are very few Latinos who are interacting that originally came from that community with like the grander society of parents. It's terrible. But it's hidden. And it's not intentional, but it happens, right?
I think one of the things you said earlier was like there's privilege in a lot of different ways. And I think that's definitely true. I mean, I'm a white dude, so pretty sad. But like one thing that I've seen is a lot, like in this IB program that I'm in, there's a lot of like soccer moms that are very like helicopter parents, just over their parents, and they're talking to their teachers, they're sending emails back and forth, and they're having things sorted out. Myself, like if I go to college, I'll be a first generation college student, and I live in a single parent home and all that, and like my dad works all day. He doesn't like have time to like get very involved in my education, and I understand that. But sometimes I look and I'm like, man, that must be like way easier if you have someone who like has your back on the educational side of things. I certainly I see it as an advantage because I know, because I've had to do a lot of things on my own without my parents' help. I feel like when I step out into the real world, I'll be okay because I know how to support myself more. But given the fact that oftentimes people who are less privileged than myself, who are in different positions, who don't have parents who are emailing teachers and checking up on their grades and all that, I think that can definitely be a big indicator. If you don't have someone at home who's like pushing you to get better, oftentimes like, and when the other kids do, you can fall behind.
And with that, we're going to move on to the last section of this before we get to a few questions, which is the topic of sanctuary. The discussion boiled down to one, a definition of what a sanctuary campus would be. Two, the discussion boiled to a law versus moral argument of theoretically the laws are in place already to protect these students like sanctuary campuses are being presented as already. But at the same time, the other side was arguing that the university has a moral obligation to go a step further, and thankfully we had some people, on the university should become sanctuary campuses side in this argument. We had some people play devil's advocate of universities shouldn't take on that label, and so one of the things that I kind of wanted to ask first was, what would be, Gabriella, your kind of definition of a sanctuary campus, of a sanctuary city, and how would that be different from what CU Denver or any other campus really is?
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm gonna actually, before I answer that, like what would be in a sanctuary policy, I want to just take a little bit of a step back. I'm gonna kind of shift my introductory remarks based on what's been discussed and what you're asking. But I think it's important to take a step back to say the whole question of why do we need sanctuary. And first of all, let me say this concept of sanctuary, as far as policy goes, it's very ephemeral. There is no set thing. The term really came about from anti-immigrant folks as communities. It was coming as cities and states were coming together and saying, wow, ICE is really overstepping their bounds and it's really impacting our communities. And it's when there is fear because there is a blurring of the line between local law enforcement and federal enforcement. It creates fear, and it also creates families that have been torn apart and separated. I'm curious, how many of you have heard of Arturo Hernandez Garcia or Jeanette Vizquerra? They're folks who, Jeanette right now is in sanctuary in a church, and that's in First Unitarian. And Arturo Hernando Garcia, he was in sanctuary for 9 months in First Unitarian, and he got into the system, as did Jeanette, as did so many people, because of this blurred line, where they were picked up in Jeanette's case for a minor traffic violation, and then she had some other charges because we don't allow people to work in this country. We don't allow people to gain status, but we want their labor, and so people often have to figure out how to find work, and so she had some papers. I don't want to get too much, and then Arturo was charged of a crime he was found completely innocent of, because we had, at that time when they were both picked up, we had collusion between local law enforcement and ICE. They are in deportation proceedings, and Arturo had been went out of sanctuary after he received a notice from ICE that he was no longer priority. And yesterday, or what is today, Friday, Wednesday morning, they went to his work and picked him up and have detained him now, and we are holding vigils right now at the detention center and yesterday at the field office. So I give this little bit of context in that, is sanctuary is not really a specific term. With churches, it's a little different. There's a long moral history that goes back to biblical times of welcoming your doors to strangers, to community members. But this concept of sanctuary came out just a few years ago, and it isn't. People always say, well, what does sanctuary mean? And really, the way that we talk about it, I actually encourage you to check out, I work for American Friends Service Committee, our website, afst.org/sanctuary everywhere, talks about how we, right now, given the current climate, given the fact that we have hateful language is accepted, that we have racist remarks coming out, that we have folks in power. We have an attorney general that does not feel the need to defend a lot of these rights. There is a sense that we really have to come out and talk about this everywhere. I have a handout here on the do's and don'ts for bystander intervention, because I think this is something where we all have to play a role. And creating sanctuary, whether it's through a formal process that I think is very important, but also how do we do it on a daily basis. The concept of sanctuary is, how do we create welcoming, safe spaces for all members of our community? And that when we don't have that, that impacts everyone. That impacts the quality of education for everyone when we have folks who are fearful of things. So what I would say is, as far as a university policy, I think there are some specific things that could be included. I'll mention those. Limiting the sharing of student information with federal immigration authorities. So this would be really setting up some clear lines of what kind of information is obtained, so that what records are really needed and what's on. This used to be less of a concern, but now with the current administration, knowing that there could be access to files and things, and so what information is collected, what is not, what is needed, what is not. If something's not needed, don't collect it. As far as someone's status or country of origin, I would say restricting immigrant agents' access to campuses. This is saying, hey, if ICE comes onto our campus for any reason, it creates unsafety for everyone. And so that means setting up, I've been talking more with schools, like K through 12 schools, and one of the ways we talk about it is there may be, in those cases, ICE might actually, not necessarily to perform an operation per se, but they might show up at a school, less likely at a college, they might show up, but if someone's parents have been deported. But even to come pick up the kids. And what we're telling schools is have a system so that actually someone else, if students need to be communicated with, then it's not ICE doing that they're actually not coming on campus to engage in that. And then prohibiting campus security from collaborating with federal immigration authorities for the purposes of enforcement. There should be no university funds, there should be no university personnel engaging in federal enforcement. That's a federal issue, and lots of folks are pushing back on that, but there is no reason for that should be very clear with with campus police, campus administration, those kinds of things. And then providing resources and information for immigrant students and their families. And I think that can be through Know Your Rights, and again, on our website, afsc.org/sanctuary everywhere, there are a lot of their Know Your Rights resources, there are things. I think then also just having a climate and saying we don't accept hate, we accept a diversity of views and ideas. We want to have lots of different perspectives, but hate and racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia, those are not allowed on campus, and being very clear and setting up a culture that we have dialogue and we discuss things, but we don't allow intimidation and hateful language. And again, I see this resources as something with that. And then I could get into the specifics around the city policy. We just presented the city with, we presented the mayor's office a few weeks back, but we just had a community forum last night where it was standing room only with about 250 folks, where we presented the policy that we want the mayor's office and city council to approve.
Okay.
That's
Yeah, well, so let me kind of backtrack to what you were saying about the campus first, and then we can certainly get into the city and how the university plays a part in that. Our Chancellor Burrell, she's a wonderful person, first of all, but when the executive orders first came out, and there was towards the end of January, she released a statement to everybody on campus that said that they won't share student records except required by law. They won't allow ICE agents to enter campus buildings and private spaces without, a warrant or anything, and did several of the things that you had listed there. So in that sense, would you consider CU Denver a sanctuary campus, or does CU Denver have something to gain by taking on the label of a sanctuary campus?
Because sanctuary is not a set term, and I'm not a part of the community, I don't feel it's my place to say whether, I would say that's all of you all's job to say whether it is and what needs to be done to do more of that. I think a statement is really, really important, and that's a really important first step, but what are the actual then procedural and practical ways that those things are being implemented? Because it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing when an ICE official shows up, who is going to make sure that that they have a warrant, if they do have a warrant, that it's valid, and and who's going to make sure the record. So those are things I would say, and I would say, I don't really, like with the city policy, and this would be to say, I don't care whether the city wants to call itself a sanctuary city or not. Ultimately, what I care about, what does the policy look like? I think saying you're a sanctuary city and you're a sanctuary campus, because there is this movement, it does send a message. So I do think there is some value in it, but ultimately, it's what is the culture of the community, whether it be a campus, what are the practices? So I would say, hearing that's great. I would say there would be a lot more to do still. Because I don't know how is that being implemented, how is that being done, how are people talking about it amongst themselves? And it's really great, to have the administration saying things, but then how does that play out at the class level? Is it a safe space for all students to really be there? And if someone is making comments that are intimidating, that are racist, are threats of calling immigration, is there a process? Are people trained to say, not to shut different ideas out, but to say that kind of behavior is actually not acceptable, and that we're here, to really have true education happen and to have exchange of ideas, there needs to be a safe space for everyone. So that's what I would say. I think yeah.
Okay. Well,
Can I add to that?
Yeah,
Just a little
absolutely.
bit? So one of my roles is I serve as the president of an organization called the Colorado Coalition for the Educational Advancement of Latinos, and it's made up of higher ed representatives from institutions across the state. And this issue that you're dealing with here at UCD is obviously being grappled with across the state and across the nation. And the sanctuary title comes with that support mechanism of the movement, right? And resisting what's perceived to be unconstitutional acts in terms of limitation and safety. But it also comes with risk. And the risk is potentially loss of federal funding, which exactly can impact negatively students' federal financial aid. I don't know about you all here, but at DU we receive about $43 million worth of federal financial aid to support our students. So do we want to do that? And is that risk going to balance out the potential reward of supporting a movement? Or to your point, very importantly, is the substance of the way in which the university is prioritizing the safety of all students, and what are the mechanisms that we're putting in place to protect them. There are a lot of folks, like you've got your very strong radical, you must support it by taking that label on sanctuary. Others that are kind of middle ground of we've let all of these things be what they are, but we're gonna say we don't agree with that approach. And then you've got some folks that are really taking on high quality and extreme measures to support our students regardless of whether or not they take on the title. So I would say even if an institution doesn't choose that status, I don't think it necessarily reflects a lack of support.
And I will just say, sorry, there was a court ruling on Wednesday that actually, the higher court ruled that a lot of the federal funds, that this is actually a hollow threat by Trump, that a lot of federal funds have specific guidelines and different things, and that an executive order cannot actually pull funds away. So I think this threat of funds is a little bit of a red herring, and I'm not, and
I agree with you, and I think that's been proven citywide, right, with the ruling around sanctuary cities.
Yes,
so.
And yet we heard city officials, that's still something people have hid behind. So, yeah.
I was just going to say what you were going to say, and then another thing that I was going to mention is that I think more so is that we do have, like for example, CU Denver, the Student Government Association passed a resolution that specifically identified that any type of immigration enforcement or is seen as a problem on our campus, and it disrupts people's sense of safety and welcoming on campus. And there is already a system in play on like how do we deal with student information, because student information only from an immigration perspective is not sufficient. It's kind of looked across the board because there are FERPA guidelines that we have to follow. And so I think there has been something around that, but it's more about making sure that the staff members are informed. So when they do see ICE coming through the doors or something like that, that they are aware of what type of documentation is needed to be presented by them, and when it's presented, what can you release and what should you not release. And so I think that's a piece of it. I like the bit about like culture and creating a sense of environment welcoming, but I think the challenging part around that is free speech, because we can say that you can't have these types of remarks, but that people are kind of entitled to that in the realm of free speech. And so it's so that's always been a challenging thing of kind of addressing, like how do you create this sense of culture, but at the same time respect people's First Amendment right around that.
No, I think that is a challenge, and the idea is not, obviously, especially at a university, the idea is not to shut down ideas. I think then the actual culture in the classroom is even more important. If one student is voicing an opinion that there is a culture within the class that they may feel is their, could be argued, well, that's their free speech to do that. And then where is it that people aren't alone? Because I think isolation can be some of the most fear-inducing components. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, and I actually also think we're way better off if we're talking about these things than if we're shutting either or both sides down. And so creating an environment where there is discussion and different issues can come out, and someone can say, actually that comment you made, like not that they can't make that comment, but that comment actually creates a lot of unsafety, is very threatening for certain members of our community. And that, again, that there's a role that not only that the allies play. We do a lot of work on what is the role of allies, and that actually shouldn't be the targeted population's job to tell someone that what they're saying is problematic. It actually should be my job as an ally or your job, that we're creating that. So I don't think the idea is not create, allow people to speak freely, but also know that since the Southern Poverty Law Center has been tracking hate crimes, and campuses, schools, and universities are the places they've been the highest. Within, I forget the numbers, I mean, it was like within the first month, there were 400 and some. I mean, they're really significant numbers. And so those are the kinds of things, though, like that really aren't acceptable. So yeah, thanks.
I got a question about that. Isn't this like the same trope that the ACLU will hide behind, that they're willing to defend people who have otherwise really virulent and diabolical plans because, I mean, they're perpetuating hate speech, but it's free speech, so it's okay. So where's the delineation between hate speech and free speech? And I see this as another defense of like liberal creed, like, well, it's my First Amendment right to say whatever the fuck I want, so like, nobody worry, I'm gonna just like perpetuate all of these horrible things that lead to really authoritarian militarism and maybe another genocidal like decline, you know? So I'm wondering, maybe, do you have a perspective on that, hate speech versus free speech?
I'm not an expert on that, so I would
Neither.
say, I mean, I think it is an important issue, and I do think, again, to me, what's more important is like, what's important is like how, like in a classroom setting or a campus setting, is it creating fear and shutting people down? That to me goes beyond, you know, then it needs to be brought into light and said, this is, you know, that we can have these discussions, but the different ways that it needs to be talked about. I mean, I think those are really important questions. I don't feel like I'm an expert to speak on that specifically.
Again, I'm not an expert on anything, but I think, I don't really think there is like a delineation. I think hate speech falls under free speech, and maybe that's kind of an unfortunate thing, but I think it's the unfortunate truth. Like, by saying anyone can't say anything, I think that's, and maybe I'm just playing the devil's advocate a little here, but I think that can be detrimental, and also it, by kind of it makes it a very much of us against you, which can lead to an atmosphere of creating some organizations centered around that hate speech. I think the more important thing is, like what you were saying, is creating a culture that recognizes, hey, what someone's saying, that's not cool, and that the rest of the people in the room don't agree with that, and that there's a general consensus against it, but not trying to just shut it down, because then it'll pop up in some other way. Yeah.
And so let me give an example. This isn't hate speech, but it's an example of something we work with a lot as working on immigrant rights. So we really encourage the not using the term illegal as an outlet to describe someone. And so, but that is something that I think we've been working really hard with the media also to not have them do that. And so I actually feel like it's in some circles used less, but it still is something people hear. So we'll be having a discussion and someone will use the term. And if we just are like, so it's kind of what we talk about is raising the issue and saying, hey, and actually pointing it out, not to out the person and make them feel bad, but to say, hey, actually, that language is a term we don't use because it's part of dehumanizing and has helped us lead to all these policies. And so creating the space where we can talk about it and even catch ourselves and do that. That's different than hate speech per se, right? And it's all a continuum. But I would say the hate speech to dehumanizing language has huge implications, right? And it is how we have had so many, has allowed so much to happen in this country that is pretty problematic. So, yeah.
With that, I think we'll kind of wrap up discussions. We'll take maybe one or two questions. I know we're running a bit short on time. But does anybody have a quick question that they want to throw out there for the group? Aaron?
Yeah, I just have a question about your comment about how we're all racist. And I just want to preface that...
How I made you say that.
The definition of racism, in Google would be that you have a prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. And if we are still all racist, in spite of the fact that we have talked about stuff like this and had experiences with other people and really learned a lot, why go that effort to become a better person if you're still going to be racist, right? And I guess my point is that just having a bias, like let's say, you know, a baby, right, who's been with white parents, they maybe get scared by someone if they've never seen like a black person, right? That is not racism, it's just they're not used to it, or it's a bias, right? And I guess I'm asking, or my point is that I don't think we should call it racism if it isn't technically racism, because just because you see someone as a different race, if you're not seeing them as inferior, I would say that's racism. And I guess calling it racism is kind of shooting yourself in the foot and keeping you from being able to solve the problem. Because if you say, like, no matter what we do, we'll all still be racist, then what can we do?
Yeah, it's not, that kind of awareness is certainly not meant to make anyone stagnate, right? Or apathetic. It's more so recognizing that racism is so built into our everyday society and experience that whether we physically think we're performing it or not, we sometimes still are, whether it's explicitly or implicitly in our consciousness or awareness. But what I also believe is that we can diminish the levels by which we are biased, right? And I actually, as you started to speak, I thought you were going to call me on something I usually counter, which is racism is typically only capable to be done by those in the position of power and authority, right? And I actually believe that is true as one of the definitions around what racism is. So, like, you might be able to ask the question, like, well, does reverse racism exist? Well, from a position of authority, no, not always. Right? Like, I might be biased, but I might not be able to be racist against you because I don't have the same positions of authority. So, to your question, I would say define it whatever feels right to you. The main point of that entire exercise was to say we all are impacted, and it's really important for us to deconstruct and reconstruct it however it moves us each forward in our level of awareness. And if for you it's not owning that, like, I don't generally walk around and go, I'm racist. But I think the moment that I recognize, okay, I might have had bias in one way or another that I'm addressing, and it might not have been racial bias. It might have been bias of disability or ageism or something else, right? That my level of awareness in that experience, if I was conscious with it, was raised, and then I didn't do it the next time. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions?
All right, so going back to your point about specialized versus generalized education and your reluctance to get into a university level, is that because since you know what you want to do, a lot of universities require secondary classes that you need to take in order to graduate, in order to become this well-rounded student, which is money, time, and effort that could be focused more on something that you already know that you want to do?
Yeah, I definitely. Like, I think being well-rounded is important. But I think, like, after you're like a sophomore in high school, if you can write an email and do that sort of stuff, you're well-rounded enough, I guess. You should still pursue learning and watching news and stay educated in other ways. But if you have the skills in those other disciplines, like if I had to go and take a college language arts class, for example, that would feel like a waste of my time, I guess. And that's kind of how my current language arts class feels as well. So yeah, I think it's important to be well-rounded, because whatever job you have, you're going to have those other skills of being able to communicate with people and all that. But you don't necessarily have to continue pursuing it and spending money on those types of classes. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Get a 6 on your IB exam and you won't have to take a college.
Yeah. I don't know about
that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering what is the difference, because I didn't know that there was like an explicit difference between affirmative action and a quota system, and what does that mean? I've just never heard that ever been said before.
So affirmative action is the more of a, not a firm policy. Well, let me start with this. Quota system is to suggest that a business or a company or a higher ed institution has to reach a specific number of women or individuals of color or whatever the classification is that they're trying to achieve for that quota. And as a result of achieving that, they disregard other qualified applicants to just reach that. blindly and not narrowly tailored, not looking at many other qualities. That's a quota system. That's been deemed unconstitutional. And the University of California system had to dismantle and kind of recreate their ways in which they tried to help create greater diversity in their community. Affirmative action is suggesting that we're recognizing the many ways in which people are privileged and not privileged historically and to date, and to look broadly from a holistic standpoint for the multitude of ways in which we're really redefining a high quality applicant. And so that could be, it includes merit, it includes potentially like global perspective, it includes one's leadership capacity. Anymore, you're doing what's called non-cognitive factors such as grit or community service, athletic capacity, legacy, and race, gender, and ethnicity, and major, minor, talents. All of those things simultaneously are consideration points. So it's one of many, and not simply you're black, so you get 10 points and you're in.
So I have a question to kind of build off of that
Yeah.
from you, which even though the quota system, like you said, is not a policy, and this might also apply to you as well, as far as being kind of in the graduate school. So if you have, say it comes down to, do you think that there's still that bias? If you have, say, 3 students and 1 spot left for them, and you have a completely white class, and then you have this diverse student, which maybe their applications are the exact same, or something like that. Do you think that there's still the bias of, well, this is what we have, so if we have these same people, and like you said, I know it's not necessarily a quota, but do you think that that's still?
So I think what you're asking is, and I would say it depends.
Yeah.
Like it depends on all of those other factors. So you would be shocked at how students' files are never exactly the same. They're
Okay.
never just about ACT or SAT. They're never just GPA. There's variation in one's rigor, in AP and IB preparation, in IB, in what they communicated in their essay, and the quality of their thinking and logic, and their ideas and their growth, and how they're going to on-campus community.
Yeah.
And so they're never the same. So the fault of others perceiving it from the outside is that they just think, well, we're all equal.
Yeah.
But they got it because they're black. In the Abigail Fisher case, there were 52 other individuals who were admitted with worse information, if you looked at just a couple of measures academically, than hers. But she was concerned about the 5 black kids. Everyone else was white. There was no complaint around the white kids. It turned racialized because it was her perception of how she was deemed unfairly treated.
Yeah.
So the multiplicity of things, there are no 2 candidates that are exactly the same. And rarely does that happen. Now, if it appeared that way legitimately, and if gender was satisfied and other quality things, and what lacked in terms of building one's like vibrant, dynamic, and reflective of society campus was a specific racial or ethnic group, and that was that one person that were there, maybe.
Yeah.
Right, but because of not just a check of the box, as I said before, race and identity is much more than just what I look like or how I identify, and that contributes to society. I'll tell you what, in my grad classes, I realized how important it was that I was there, because the content of the conversation went very differently when I wasn't speaking. And I would even experiment with, I'm going to speak or I'm not, and let's see what's discussed here. And when I chose not to speak, I was highly concerned about the lack of depth societally of the discussion. But I would let myself do that. So it's much more than just that.
Well, and at the graduate school level, I hope my admissions committees think like this, and I think some of them do. Like, when we were talking about equity and access, if you've been privileged all the way up through your undergraduate, your application may look a little bit different than a person who hasn't had those same privileges. And so you have to think a little bit about, mostly what we're looking for is potential. And that you know, there may be different ways to define that and to suss it out, because Otherwise, you're just gonna end up with all of the privileged white kids.
And I would say, and what would probably happen in most spaces is the full pay student, regardless of all of that other stuff, would be the one that was admitted last. Which sucks, by the way. It just sucks, right?
So unfortunately, due to time, we are going to have to wrap up today. We wanted to thank you all for coming, Melissa and everyone in the audience for staying. I think we do have contact information if you are willing to give it to our students as well. That would be great. But that's all that we have for you today, so thank you.
Okay, if you're interested in what the policy that we're pushing at the city level is, here it is, and if you want to call, or we have information on city council members to call. And then here's a copy of the do's and don'ts for bystander intervention that I think relates to both campus and outside of campus.